Hello, I'm Professor Vibha Sharma. I teach in the Department of English, and we are continuing our discussion on environmental humanities. In the previous lecture, we talked about what is environmental humanities as a discipline. Why do we need it? What are the reasons that it stands in collaboration and it complements sciences? How it has evolved in recent years, why do we need it? These were certain things that we discussed in great detail, and I'm sure that based on that discussion, you must have started thinking about your location, your area, and how things have evolved in recent years, let us say in 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years, where you have grown up, the city, the village, the town that you live in, or any particular observation that you have of the things that you like. Maybe it is not in your town, but you have heard about it, you follow it. So I want you to keep thinking about these things. You see that when we are talking of environment, it cannot simply go on happening as an academic discipline. Although I am talking to you virtually, you are watching me in this video, but I want you to feel this discussion as something real life, as something that is happening around you. And for that, the good thing is you all are different in different locations. You are watching it in different parts of India. So it is not necessary that only one kind of experience is going to be part of it. So your own experience, your own identity, your own understanding is going to be of great help in transforming this discussion into some kind of meaningful substance. So I urge you, I request you, I suggest you to keep thinking, to keep observing, to keep correlating, to keep jotting down those points mentally, or you can create a notebook. That will be of great help for you to go across this particular course, because this will not just be a documentation of what is happening in the discussion on the screen, but it will also be a documentation of what you have understood and how your understanding is evolving. All right. So in this lecture, we are going to talk about certain technical aspects, or let us say some jargons, some important terms, some important pillars of environmental humanities, because environmental humanities now, as you have seen in the previous discussion, a very well established discipline in academics, in research, and various other fields related to our life. So the first is the Anthropocene and humans as a planetary force of nature. I'm confident that many of you watching this lecture have heard this word Anthropocene. It is not something to be scared of. It is not something very technical. It has a very specific meaning, and its meaning impacts a lot, matters a lot in environmental humanities. So having discussed why environmental humanities emerged as a response to contemporary ecological crisis, we are now here at one of the most influential concepts in contemporary environmental thought. This concept is the Anthropocene. The term Anthropocene has become one of the most defining ideas of 21st century. It is a concept that has traveled far beyond geology and entered discussions in literature, philosophy, history, politics, sociology, media studies, and cultural theory. So, let us begin with a simple thought experiment. Of course, you are there on that side of the screen, I am on this side of the screen. if we cannot do some kind of practical experiment, we can do a thought experiment. Imagine again that a scientist living 50,000 years in the future were to excavate the earth and examine its geological layers. What evidence might they find that human beings once inhabited this planet? For example, like when we excavate the things of the past today and we try to learn that what our forefathers used in their daily life, how was their life like, we understand with whatever excavations happen, whether it is Indus Valley civilization, we see on that in the sites what the materials that are excavated, the pots are excavated, the jewelry, the remnants of fabrics, the brick houses, their lifestyle, everything is understood by what we explore, what we excavate from those sites. So it is very helpful, and it has made us understand that what was their life, what kind of people were they, what trades did they conduct, what literature did they have, what life did they have, what food did they grow, the grains, the seeds, the recipes, their kitchens, their water arrangements, their irrigation. So many things we know about them just because of the remnants of the things that we dig out from the soil, buried inside, and we excavate those things, we explore those things. Now, think of ourselves. What are we now leaving behind? What evidence might the future scientists find that human beings once inhabited this planet? Would they find our books? Probably not. Would they find our governments and institutions? Unlikely. What would they almost certainly find are traces embedded within the earth itself. Plastic particles, concrete, industrial chemicals, radioactive residues, altered sedimentation patterns, carbon signatures from fossil fuel combustion, and perhaps even fossilized remains of domesticated animals produced by industrial agriculture. In other words, future geologists may read human history directly in the rocks. This realization led Nobel Prize-winning atmospheric chemist Paul Crutzen to propose the term Anthropocene in the early 2000s. He argued that human activities had become so significant that they now function as a geological force comparable to volcanoes, tectonic shifts, glacial movements. You understand that human beings are not just now a small component of nature, earth, but they have become that much impactful that they are now impacting the environment, the geology, like volcanoes do, like tectonic shifts do, like the glacial movements do. So he created this term Anthropocene in early 2000s to define this impact, this signification of the human action. For centuries, humans imagined themselves as small actors within a vast natural world. Today, many scholars argue that humanity has become one of the most powerful agents shaping planetary systems. Planetary systems means the systems of our planet. Human activities alter atmospheric chemistry. Human activities influence ocean circulation. Human activities affect biodiversity. Human activities reshape landscapes on a global scale. Human activities even influence evolutionary trajectories. Never before has a single species exercised such extensive influence over the planet. This changes everything. Traditionally, nature and humanity were imagined as separate domains. Nature was viewed as an external background against which human history unfolded. The Anthropocene disrupts this assumption. Human history and earth history are now deeply entangled. The distinction between natural and cultural processes becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. So culture and nature, what we follow culturally, what exists naturally, are now becoming entangled. It is not inseparable anymore. When climate change alters monsoon patterns, can we call this a natural event? Only. When oceans become acidic because of industrial emissions, can we separate nature from culture? When plastic particles are found in Arctic ice, remote forests, and even human blood streams, where exactly does nature end and human influence begin? These questions illustrate why the Anthropocene is not merely a geological concept. It is also a philosophical and cultural concept. Environmental humanities scholars have enthusiastically engaged with this idea because it forces us to rethink fundamental assumptions about human existence. However, the Anthropocene is not without controversy. Many scholars have criticized this term. Why? Because the term Anthropocene literally means the age of humans. Yet, not all humans have contributed equally to environmental degradation. A subsistence farmer in rural part of a country and a multinational corporation do not bear the same ecological responsibility. An indigenous community protecting forests is not equally responsible for climate change as fossil fuel industries. This critique has led scholars such as Jason Moore to propose the term Capitalocene. So, Capitalocene suggests that capitalism, rather than humanity as a whole, is the primary driver of ecological destruction. Similarly, Donna Haraway and others have proposed alternative terms such as plantationocene, and emphasizing colonial histories, plantation economies, multi-species relationships, and ecological entanglements. So, these are different kinds of words that have emerged in recent decades to actually define one thing, and that is the increasing impact of human existence in the world order. So, human beings are not anymore only a small component of this larger picture. In fact, like the big natural activities happening around us, human actions are also impacting those. And these discussions have from time to time created different words, different jargons to address this process. And these debates that are happening around this, whether it is to call it Capitalocene or to call it Plantationocene or to call it Anthropocene, these debates remind us that environmental problems are never purely scientific. I'm sure you must be feeling that I'm repeating this sentence many times, or I'm focusing on it a lot. But this is something very crucial because this needs to be brought home. This needs to be understood clearly. We must come to terms with this understanding that it's not just about science. There are also questions of how these terms, like why do we need these different terms and how these different terms are emerging. It explains that these questions are of power, inequality and justice. So that is why in the previous lecture also I told about this, and I'm again referring to it here, that in fact environmental humanities asks who benefits from environmental exploitation, who bears its consequence, whose voices are included in environmental decision making, whose histories are erased. So the Anthropocene thus becomes a profoundly ethical concept. It does not remain just a scientific concept. If humans have become a planetary force, what responsibilities accompany that power? How should we relate to future generations? What obligations do we owe other species? Can economic growth remain the central measure of success? These are not scientific questions alone. These are again ethical questions, philosophical questions, humanistic questions. And this is why Anthropocene occupies such a central place within environmental humanities. So what we see now next is we will try to see that understanding these challenges requires a dialogue between different forms of knowledge, particularly between science and the humanities. Now let us look at the defining pillars of environmental humanities. As it is an interdisciplinary field, what exactly does it mean, or what exactly does being interdisciplinary mean here? Let us again explore the major intellectual pillars that collectively constitute environmental humanities. The first pillar is environmental humanities, environmental literature and eco-criticism. Literature has always been one of humanity's most powerful ways of imagining relationships with nature. From ancient epics and pastoral poetry to contemporary climate fiction, literary texts reveal how societies understand the non-human world. Environmental literary studies examine questions such as how is nature represented? How do literary narratives shape ecological consciousness? How do metaphors influence environmental attitudes? Scholars such as Lawrence Buell, Cheryl Glotfelty, Greg Garrard and Timothy Morton have significantly contributed to this area. So, this literature, that is the first thing is literature, eco-criticism. The second important pillar is environmental history. Environmental historians have challenged the notion that human history unfolds independently of environmental conditions. They investigate how climate, geography, disease, agriculture, forests, rivers, and ecosystems have shaped civilizations. Environmental history demonstrates that nature is not merely a backdrop to history, nature is an active participant in historical processes. In India, scholars such as Ramachandra Guha, Madhav Gadgil have shown how environmental conflicts are deeply connected to questions of development, resource use, and social justice. Now, the third pillar is environmental philosophy and ethics. Perhaps no area raises more fundamental questions. What moral obligations do humans have toward non-human beings? Do animals possess rights? Can ecosystems have intrinsic values? Should future generations be considered in present decisions? Environmental ethics emerged partly as a response to the limitations of anthropocentrism. That is, the belief that humans occupy the center of moral concern. Thinkers such as Aldo Leopold, Arne Naess, Peter Singer, Holmes Rolston have profoundly shaped these discussions. So I hope this is clear that environmental ethics is partly as a response to the limitation of anthropocentrism. The belief, what is the anthropocentrism? The belief that humans occupy the center of moral concern. Now, the fourth pillar is culture and media studies. Environmental awareness today is increasingly mediated through films, documentaries, social media, advertising, journalism, and digital platforms. Media do not merely reflect environmental realities, they actively shape environmental perceptions. The way climate change is framed in news reports can influence public attitudes and policy debates. So, environmental humanities therefore pays close attention to environmental communication. The fifth pillar here is indigenous and traditional ecological knowledge. Across the world, indigenous communities have developed sophisticated understandings of ecosystems through centuries of lived experience. These knowledge systems challenge the assumption that modern science possesses a monopoly on environmental understanding. They offer alternative ways of imagining relationships between humans and nature. The sixth pillar is environmental justice. Environmental harms are not distributed equally. Marginalized communities often bear disproportionate ecological burdens. Polluting industries are frequently located near poor populations. Climate change affects vulnerable groups more severely. Environmental humanities therefore examines the intersections of ecology, race, class, gender, caste, and colonial histories. Finally, ecological science remain indispensable. Environmental humanities does not replace ecology. It has been said many times here. It builds upon ecological knowledge while expanding the interpretive frameworks through which environmental issues are understood. Taken together, these pillars reveal the extraordinary richness of environmental humanities. It is not a discipline confined within narrow boundaries. It is a meeting place, a space where literature converses with ecology, philosophy engages science, history intersects with climate, ethics encounters politics, stories meet data, and where humanity seeks new ways of imagining its relationship with the living world. Now, the environmental imagination and how cultures dream of nature. So, at the heart of environmental humanities lies a deceptively simple but extraordinarily important insight. Human beings do not merely live in environments, they imagine them. So, before we act upon nature, before we conserve it, exploit it, protect it, fear it, romanticize it, or destroy it, we first imagine it in particular ways. This is what scholars call the environmental imagination. Environmental humanities asks us to recognize that nature is never encountered in a completely neutral manner. Every society, every culture, every civilization develops stories, myths, metaphors, religious beliefs, artistic representations, and philosophical assumptions that shape how people perceive the natural world. Consider a forest. The physical forest may remain unchanged, but its meaning varies dramatically. To a logging corporation, it may appear as timber. To an ecologist, it appears as biodiversity. To an indigenous community, it may be an ancestral homeland. To a poet, it may symbolize mystery, solitude, or renewal. To a child, it may be a place of wonder. What changes is not the forest itself, but the cultural lens through which it is perceived. Environmental humanities therefore studies these imaginative frameworks. One of the most influential thinkers in this regard is William Cronon, who famously challenged the modern idea of wilderness. He argued that wilderness is not simply a physical place but a cultural invention. Many modern societies imagine wilderness as pristine nature, untouched by humans, yet indigenous peoples have inhabited and shaped these landscapes for centuries. So humans are not out of nature. Humans are not outside wilderness. Humans are also part of wilderness. Thus, even our ideas about untouched nature often reflect particular historical and cultural assumptions. The environmental imagination also shapes public policy. If rivers are merely imagined as economic resources, policies will focus on extraction and management. If rivers are imagined as living entities, entirely different ethical possibilities will emerge. Indeed, countries such as New Zealand, Ecuador, Colombia, and India have witnessed legal debates concerning the rights of river and ecosystems. So we are one of the important countries which talk of the rights of these bodies like river, mountains. Such developments demonstrate that imagination has material consequences. Imagination does not have only abstract consequences, it also has material consequences, because how we treat our rivers is rooted in our imagination of our environment, and that has led to the way we are protecting our ecosystem environment. Environmental imagination also influences our visions of the future. Contemporary climate narratives often oscillate between dystopian and utopian futures. Dystopian narratives imagine ecological collapse, mass displacement, and environmental catastrophe. Utopian narratives imagine sustainable societies, renewable energy, ecological restoration, harmonious coexistence. So the futures we imagine influence the futures we attempt to create. Therefore, environmental humanities studies not only environments but environmental dreams. It asks, how have different societies imagined nature? What stories shape our ecological consciousness? How do those stories influence our actions? And perhaps most importantly, can new environmental imaginations help us create more sustainable future? Now look at these discussions like sacred groves and living rivers. So I'm trying to now look at some examples, look at some point of reference so that it can help you further, especially in the context of India. Environmental humanities often appears to be contemporary academic field. However, many of its central insights have deep roots in ancient intellectual traditions. India provides an especially rich context for exploring these traditions. Long before modern environmentalism emerged, Indian philosophical, religious, and literary traditions developed sophisticated understandings of human relationships with the non-human world. The Vedas present natural elements such as sacred forces rather than inert matter. Agni, Vayu, Surya, Varun, Prithvi are not merely physical phenomena, they are manifestations of cosmic order. This does not mean that ancient societies were environmentally perfect. Rather, it demonstrates that many pre-modern traditions conceived nature through frameworks of reverence rather than domination. The Upanishadic concept of interconnectedness further enriches this perspective. The idea that individual self is connected to larger cosmic realities challenges modern notions of radical human separation from nature. Environmental humanities finds remarkable resonance here. One of the central arguments of the field is that humans are embedded within ecological networks rather than standing outside them. Indian literature repeatedly reinforces this insight. Consider Kalidas. In Abhigyan Shakuntalam, the relationship between Shakuntala and the forest is not merely incidental. Plants, animals, rivers, and seasons participate in emotional and ethical life. Nature is not scenery, nature is character. Nature possesses agency. Nature responds to human actions. Environmental humanities scholars would describe this as a more than human narrative. The Bhakti and Sufi traditions similarly reveal ecological sensibilities. Kabir's poetry influence frequently dissolves boundaries between the divine and the human and the natural world. Guru Nanak repeatedly emphasized ecological interconnectedness. Many Sufi traditions found a divine presence within landscapes, rivers, gardens, and living beings, these traditions invite us to reconsider dominant modern assumptions about human exceptionalism. Particularly fascinating are India's sacred groves. Across many regions, communities preserved patches of forest because they were considered sacred. These groves are functioned as biodiversity hotspots. Conservation emerged not from environmental regulations but from cultural values in our context. This offers a very important lesson. Environmental protection is not always achieved through scientific management alone. Cultural beliefs, rituals, stories, and ethical traditions can also play significant ecological roles. Similarly, rivers occupy a unique place within environmental consciousness in India. The Ganga, Yamuna, Narmada, Kaveri, and numerous other rivers are simultaneously ecological systems, spiritual entities, cultural symbols, and economic lifelines. This multidimensional understanding of rivers challenges purely technocratic approaches to environmental governance. Environmental humanities, therefore, encourages us to learn from these traditions, not by merely romanticizing the past, but by recognizing alternate ways of imagining human-nature relationships. In an age of climate crisis, such traditions offer valuable resource for ecological thinking. So, in this discussion, we have seen that we are talking of the various aspects of. So, what I have said here, what I have discussed here is the different aspects of environmental humanities that are going to become the threads of more profound discussions in the lectures to come. I hope this kind of brainstorming, this lecture is basically about brainstorming. It has done a lot of brainstorming, and you must be now thinking of various things that you know, that you are familiar with, that you have heard, that you have read, that you see, and that you believe, that you have grown up with. And they are going to be very important in these discussions, in the understanding of the topics that are to follow. So for now, this is the lecture. We will meet in a different lecture. These are some of the books that I have referred to. Thank you very much.